Testing, 1, 2, 3. Okay, we're going to start the meeting in 1 minute. It's 9:29, so if everyone can take a seat that's in the room, thank you. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for attending the Planning Committee meeting. Agenda 7, and we definitely do have quorum. So, I'm going to read my official comments. This is a public meeting to consider the proposed comprehensive official plan and zoning bylaw amendments listed as items 1 to 4 on today's agenda. For the items listed above, only those who make oral submissions today or written submissions before the amendments are adopted may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board. In addition, the applicant may appeal the matter to the Ontario Municipal Board if Council does not adopt an amendment within 120 days of receipt of the application for zoning and 180 days for an official plan amendment. The comment sheet is available at the door. If you wish to sign up to speak, please do so. I do have some people that already have. So we'll go on to the agenda now. Any declarations of interest from committee members? Seeing none, thank you. Confirmation of minutes of the 28th of April, 2015. Are those carried? Thank you. Okay. The zoning bylaw amendment for 385 Sussex Drive, we're going to hold that. We do have a speaker. The zoning bylaw amendment for 187 Metcalf Street, we have the proponent is here to speak, to answer questions if necessary. Does anyone have any questions or wish to hold item number 2? Is that the one you wanted to hold? Okay, sorry. Hold. Sorry, I thought you were talking about 1. Item number 3. Item number 3, the zoning bylaw amendment for 873, 875, 877 Contour Street and 2705, 2709 Paget Road in the ward of Innis. We have only the applicant to speak. Does anyone want to hold this item, or does anyone have any questions to hold? Where's the applicant? Mr. Burgo? Is it? No. Mr. Teifer? Hi. Are you okay if committee supports this application? You don't need to speak? Thank you. So committee, is that carried? Carried. Thank you. Okay, the next one is the zoning bylaw amendment in my ward, part of 3872 Greenbank Road. Okay, and I think Mr. Deneme is here probably just to speak if we have questions. I have no registered speakers. Does anyone else want to ask any questions about this new Minto development in South Nepean? It is different, I'll just say, because we have a wider road. This is the start of hopefully improving suburban development, making it more livable, thank you, and perhaps lay-bys by the schools. I mean, these are like very small steps, but it's nice to see. Does anyone have any questions of Mr. Deneme? If not, can we carry this item? Carried, thank you. We have a presentation on number 5 from staff, and number 6, pardon? Number 6 is a status update, planning committee inquiries and motions. Is that received? A question?
If I could just for the record say, like I have the inquiry in there on the splash pads that was put in February 2014. The latest update on there says they will come back to us in June this year. We're going to lose 2 full construction seasons on how long it's taking staff to reply to this. So I hope there's no intention to delay when June comes around. I'd like to put that on the record right now.
So we'll ask the question since you're bringing that up, and I know that we have been both working on that.
You've been very helpful with that, yes.
Mr. Mizzi, any chance that can be brought up to the May 26th meeting? Could you look at it, please?
Yes, Madam Chair, we will. Thank you.
Okay? Because you're right. All right, so is that received? Thank you very much. Okay, so we'll go back to the beginning. And our first held item is the zoning bylaw amendment for 385 Sussex Drive. And this is a staff recommendation that council approve an amendment to the zoning bylaw at 385 Sussex, which is a Notre Dame Cathedral Basilica, to permit a temporary parking lot for a maximum of 3 years. And we do have a speaker. Any questions before I go to the speaker, the delegation, sorry? Did you want to ask your question, then? Okay. So I'm going to ask Mr. Tritt, Robert Tritt, you're here. Thank you. And Mr. Tritt is representing the Lowertown Community Association. Are you here to represent the association or yourself? Okay, thank you. Thank you for coming. You have 5 minutes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. We, the Lowertown Community Association, appreciate the opportunity to speak to you, of course. We're speaking against the application because we believe it's will have an impact on efforts to ever redevelop the entire parking lot behind the cathedral. I think we should be clear that the application, even though it looks like a very minor corner of a parking lot, temporary reapproval, in fact, what you're talking about is a zoning amendment that will affect the future of the entire parking lot. Let's also be clear, I think we can all agree on this, that surface parking is not an appropriate use for that land. Now, the problem, of course, is that for much of the parking lot it's been grandfathered, and there's not too much the city can do about it. The corner you were looking at this morning, however, this is not the case, and you do have the authority to do whatever you like with that, including prohibit parking should you so choose. So we think it's very important to understand the relationship then between this apparently minor application and the much larger picture. Now, the link between the two is clear because of developments some 12 years ago. Somebody bombed the church 12 years ago.
I think somebody's looking for a new job.
In 2003, Madam Chairman, in 2003, after a lot of discussion, much controversy, the city agreed to let the church tear down 2 heritage buildings and expand the parking lot to the corner we're talking about this morning. At the time, it stated its intention was to bring forward on a long-term basis plans to redevelop the site. It was going to move its headquarters from Kilbourne Avenue and bury the parking completely. As I say, after a lot of discussion, the city basically agreed to this arrangement. If you wish, I think what it did is accepted the short-term pain of more parking and the loss of 2 buildings in return for the long-term gain of getting rid of the parking completely. That was the understanding that was reached in 2003-2004. In an OMB decision in September 2004, it was recognized it was going to take more than 3 years for all of this to happen, and the OMB has specifically recorded the church's warning that it would want to apply for one or more temporary applications. So now where are we today? The church is now asking for the 4th time permanent parking on the site. In these circumstances, we believe to approve a further temporary zoning would be a terrible mistake and send absolutely the wrong message about how the city feels about surface parking in the central area, in the market, in a heritage district, particularly where 2 heritage buildings were destroyed. So we have written to you, you have a letter before you, with 2 options. Briefly, the first one is we would like you to turn down the application, effectively send it back to staff, ask them to return when they're satisfied the church has in place some sort of plan for development. Now, if that's too courageous for you, if you wish to be a little more timid this morning, the second alternative would be approve the application, but at the same time, in some way, shape, or form, send a very clear message to the church that you're not happy with the development on this file. 12 years is far too long. That this is the last time there will be a temporary approval, and that you want to see a development plan presented before this committee before 2018. Now, we understand this kind of message is probably more symbolic than real, but symbols are important, and it's certainly better than doing nothing, which is basically what the staff report suggests you do. Now, let me finish by saying that we appreciate very much the important role the Archdiocese plays in our community, especially in Lower Town. We also fully understand the challenges of developing the site. It's a difficult site. There will be lots of restrictions because of its heritage status. The church will have to probably sell land to find the money to fund it. So it's not going to be easy for them, and we recognize that. And we're not trying to punish the church. We're not suggesting cut off the parking immediately. We're simply urging you to use this opportunity to push them just a little bit harder to take a look at the possibilities for development. I think everybody in the room would agree that the long-term objective is to get this site redeveloped. We're just suggesting that use this opportunity to make sure it happens sooner rather than later. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. I like the fact that you've made two suggestions as well. Very productive. I have three speakers so far, Councillor Nussbaum, Councillor Cloutier, and Councillor Leeper. And do you have any questions of Mr. Tritt? Do you have any questions, Mr. Tritt? Mr. Leeper? Councillor Leeper, sorry. So, Mr. Tritt, thank you for coming out today. You can take your seat. They're going to have questions of staff.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And also, I would ask the colleagues that are asking questions, if you want the representative of the applicant, Mr. Peter Weiss, is in the audience, if you have questions of him as well. Do you want him to attend the table? Yes. So, Mr. Weiss, would you come up here for questions? And we'll start with Councillor Nussbaum.
Okay, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to follow up a little bit on the report and what we heard just now from our guest speaker. I gather from the report that the initial justification for the temporary parking lot was to provide a revenue-generating opportunity for the Archdiocese to, I guess, gather enough capital to develop the site itself. But then, I'm presuming that that has changed in light of the fact that the Archdiocese made an application last year to turn the parking lot into a permanent one. So I guess my question, either for the applicant or for staff, maybe more appropriately for the applicant, is what is at this stage the plan for that space, which was always granted temporary parking status, never a permanent one, in light of the fact that you've sought permanent status? Have your plans changed?
Thank you, Councillor. The long-term plans haven't. The long-term plans haven't changed. The church still hope at some time in the future to develop that parking lot, but I'm not going to mislead you. The church aren't going to mislead you. It will not happen in the short term. I don't have to speak to people who know about money, and the money just isn't available at this time. The church serves, and I ask each of you in your communities, the church serves all of the community, and there are a number of new churches being built throughout. So the funds have to be spread. It would be great if they could do that. It's a goal, but I don't want to mislead anyone. It won't happen at the end. If this temporary is granted, it won't happen at that time. There will not be plans. The dollars just aren't available.
Has there been any consideration given to partnering with a developer or some private sector entity, given the fact that capital seems to be the problem, to engage in some sort of partnership that would allow someone else to build on that site for you?
I'm not privy. I know there have been a couple of discussions with some developers, but, Council, I have to tell you, that site was the first site that the church owned in the city of Ottawa. It's their masterpiece, I suppose, with the cathedral. And their preference certainly is not to do a co-venture or a joint with a developer. It's just too important a site. If you've ever been in the cathedral, you know what I'm saying. They're just not not on for that right now. That's my understanding. I haven't been involved in any of those discussions.
So I guess my last question is, given that this was always seen to be a temporary extension, and that you're telling us this morning that there are no immediate plans to be able to develop the site, if a temporary extension were granted, what do you foresee happening in 2 or 3 years whenever the end of that temporary extension is given?
I think, Councillor, that was the reason that the permanent rezoning was applied for, so we wouldn't have to come back in the 3 years. So I can see us in all probability being back, but I think I just should add a little bit to the practical of this whole thing. If you look at that lot, there are 85 spaces that are zoned for full-range commercial parking. The 57 spaces can be used for church-only parking. Notwithstanding my client's purpose, objectives to develop this site, it can still be used as a parking lot. It's just the commercial end for the 57 spaces. And my submission to you is that it is providing a need in the market area at this time. I can't say any more than that.
Sorry, that wasn't my understanding reading the report. I had understood that the issue was a surface parking lot.
So this now is a question to staff.
Right.
Okay.
So my question to staff is that a correct statement that there would be permanent continued allowance to use this site as a private surface parking lot?
Madam Chair, the parking is there. The church could use it as parking for their use, sort of an accessory use to the church. This application deals specifically with the ability to use it as a public parking, so it allow people to park there who are not associated with the church. So it could remain as specifically church parking, yes.
Okay, sorry, but just because the report talks a lot about the official plan requirements that talk about discouraging surface parking lot.
Madam Chair, that's correct. There's different types of parking. One, there's parking that's associated with the use, and you can provide it in accordance with the bylaw. You can even provide more than what the bylaw requires, but it has to be associated with that use. What the official plan talks to is surface paid parking lots like we have here in Centertown. It talks about discouraging those or getting rid of them in favor of parking structure or parking underground. So when they use this to have parking for patrons of the market, that's their paid surface parking lot that the official plan is speaking to is not a good thing. And certainly that is the reason why the staff couldn't support when the application originally came in, support this long-term permanent surface parking lot for paid means. But that is the conundrum, in that if it was just provided for the church, it could be church parking, yes.
So the issue is, if we encourage the commercial use, the applicant presumably won't be incentivized to change the use. If we don't, then there is an incentive because there isn't actual revenue generation, and we would hope that the applicant would then sell the property so that we get the type of development that the CDP anticipates.
Madam Chair, it is a bit of a catch-22 to say that if they couldn't raise the money that they'd have to sell it, but that'd be up to obviously to the church to decide. But okay. That is a conundrum, yes.
Thanks. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Really good questions. I can tell you in a conversation I had a couple of months ago with Mr. Mizzi, we were talking about parking in a downtown, and just as you were saying, they would never ever recommend the permanency for that purpose in a downtown. I think the other thing before we go to Councillor Cloutier is where we are vis-a-vis the Byward Market, the Rideau Realm that we're working on, the other pieces that will come forward for the Byward Market, and the time that this gives us as a temporary, that is the same kind of timeline. Then we'll be dealing with other pieces of the Byward Market within this term as well. And how that all fits together, I think, is going to be important. Thank you. Really good questions. Councillor Cloutier.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Mr. Vice, without giving us the amount, has in the financial statements of the Archdiocese or the Notre Dame Basilica specifically, have the funds generated by the 57 spots been segregated in any way?
Yes, they have been, Councillor. In fact, we gave a I won't say it was an undertaking, but the church back in 2002 advised the city that any funds from those 57 spaces, in fact, they've even taken some from the 85 spaces, are all being used for the betterment of the cathedral itself. There's been some, after the main renovation, there's been other matters that have had to be dealt with. And there's one in the process now, I understand, and that's providing access for disability, for disabled people. That's the next small step with regard to the cathedral.
So they're in revenue, well, segregated. They're being used by the basilica, by the cathedral for general purpose, not to fund the redevelopment of the site.
I don't like to give fuzzy answers, but I think it's combined, Councillor, that they are using some of it to do improvements to the cathedral itself, but the fund is there. But let's face it, that's not going to get that site developed. The small amount, I agree with staff on that. That's not going to happen, and the community association. That's a small amount, no matter what it is.
In your statistics, if they're kept, is the site most used, for your opinion, for the benefit of parishioners who can park there on a Sunday or during religious services, for the convenience of the parishioners, or to continue to generate funds?
I think that's a combination. The site, I'm told, is not used unless you have a large funeral or a large wedding, and then the whole site is reserved. If there was a person that had some political significance, the whole site would be during the week. But it is certainly, I am told, used on Sundays, feast days, things of that nature. The whole site is being used for the church, and it's reserved for them.
And during the week to generate revenue.
Exactly.
What happens if we don't pass this today?
Well, the parking lot's still going to be there, because as Mr. James has explained, there's going to be the 85 spots that can be used commercially and the 55 just used for church use. So that's what's going to happen. It's not going to prevent the lot being used for parking. It is going to prevent the 55 spaces to be used for commercial purposes.
But it would still be used for parishioners.
Yes. Any
consideration been given by the Archdiocese about the entire lot, the 57 and the 85, to develop the entire lot?
Well, yes, that's the long-term objective. But that's why I said earlier, I don't want to mislead anyone. That isn't going to happen in the near future. But in fact, plans were drafted about 5 years ago, extensive plans, with costing, everything, and it was just far too expensive. It couldn't nearly meet, their budgets for the next number of years, given, as I said earlier, the other ministries that they have to deal with throughout the whole city. This is one site of, I think, something like 85.
Okay. Thank you.
So just to be clear, I don't think Mr. Vice was able to answer your question about the finances, because you're the lawyer, not other than to say that the finance benefit is entirely used by the Basilica, by the Roman Catholic Church.
I'm sorry?
You weren't able to identify the amount of money that has been earned, how that plays out with the operation of the church, because that's not you're the lawyer, you're not the finance guy.
Yes, all I know, my understanding is that any revenue from those 57 spaces is put into this one fund, and it's used for betterment of the cathedral.
Okay, is anyone else here with the church? Or just the two of you?
Of Ms. Jock from Novatech Engineering, who did our planning on this file. But
Okay, and how many people on committee met with the church members? Anybody? Okay. I think that in context with the question that Councillor Cloutier asked, I think that it's important that you have some idea of the scope of the income that the church is benefiting from with this parcel. I just think it's important to put in context, because and Mr. Mizzi can speak to that.
Thank you, Madam Chair. In preparing for this item, we did pull background material out, and when this matter came before what was then the equivalent of the Planning Committee back in 2003, the Archdiocese did speak to the committee and outlined that the revenue to be generated by this commercial parking lot at the time was about $500,000 a year, and it would be used for the benefit of the church, yes.
So I think that's important information for you to have. And we're going to go now. Are you finished? Okay, Councillor Leeper and then Councillor Brockington.
What were the buildings that were taken down in 2003?
I remember this, Madam Chair, I remember when this first came in, they were heritage buildings that were destroyed. I think it might have been, I can't recall, maybe like 2 houses in the back corner, but they were designated as heritage buildings.
And presumably in return for being allowed to destroy these designated houses, they made promises and with respect to developing the land. Were we given a time frame in 2003 of when they expected to be able to develop, or did we leave that just open-ended?
They expected it to take about 8 to 10 years, Madam Chair, at that time, in anticipation of having the lot redeveloped.
So would we have anticipated that we'd find ourselves here, 12 years later, and still no viable plan for development moving forward?
Madam Chair, I would say, as noted by the applicant, it wouldn't happen in the near future, so it might be perhaps that long again. It certainly won't be within the next 3 years, as mentioned by the applicant.
You know, I certainly share Councillor Nussbaum's discomfort about the message that we're sending to the market with respect to the definition of temporary moving forward. Thank you. That's all my questions.
Yeah, and because I did meet with the Monsignor, I can tell you that they haven't had interest in it from the outside community, and they don't have interest at this time in development. It's not the business that they're in, and it's not as though they've had parties coming to talk to them about repurposing or putting in an outside stacked garage or whatever that might be. And I think that, and as I said, Mr. Mizzi has been very, very clear on the fact that as a long-term use, that would never ever be something that would ever be recommended by planning and growth management. Councillor Brockington.
So what's the definition of a long-term use? Because my understanding is the request for an extension, this is not the first time that's been before the Planning Committee, and I just want some clarification on the number of times that...
4 times so far.
Okay. So
12 years.
That, in my mind, Madam Chair, is 12 years is 12 years. And if the calculations are correct that they're earning $500,000 a year, that's $6 million. So at some point, a decision has to be made. I was just joking with my colleagues on both sides. It's rare that a community association comes to Planning Committee and urges us to develop a site, to build on a site right now that has a parking lot. But you get a sense from the community that surrounds the Basilica that there are desires to get the project going. And, you know, there are churches in River Ward, and certainly churches around the U of O where I was a student, that rent out spots because it is a revenue generator, because some churches are struggling, and every dollar counts. So I have sympathy to Notre Dame, to...
Okay, hang on a second.
Yeah.
You're into wrap-up now, so I want to know, do you have any questions of Mr. Weiss, or does anyone have any? You're going to have questions? Do you have any questions of them? Because I'll come put you back on the list to talk.
Very well.
Okay?
Yep.
Okay, so Councillor Chiarelli, questions of...
Yeah. All right, let's say this application were denied.
isn't it true that there are still going to be just as many parishioners and cars coming to that area?
Hopefully.
Yeah, well, this decision isn't going to keep them from coming to the area.
That's once a week or a couple of times a week, depending on
Well, no,
committees and stuff.
it's more than once a week because major funerals are held there all the time. I've gone there many times and been unable to find a place to park, so I've seen that. Secondly, were you ever asked, I know the answer to this, so I'm asking anyway, were you ever asked at previous temporary rezonings to make a commitment to construct by a certain date?
No, not by a certain date, and I've only been on this file since 2003, so I have the history on the temporary. I don't have it before that.
Can you bend your microphone down so people can hear it?
I'm sorry, yeah.
Bend your mic down.
I've only been on the file since 2003, but no, there was never any date given. I can only assure you that the church would love to get construction going on that site to fulfill their mission. They were hoping to move their activities from Kilbourne there, but no. And to answer your first question, yes, there still will be parking on the site, Councillor.
Yeah, and third question, are there, in terms of generating interest from the private sector, isn't it the case that there would be some nervousness about entering into that venture because you're putting up a new construction next to such a landmark building that it will create a whole bunch of
I don't
extra
think
concerns?
that's a good question for Mr. Weiss. That's more of a staff because it's
No, because
structural.
he's the lawyer for them. I'm talking about in terms of process, getting it through.
I don't think there's any doubt that the church want to make sure that the heritage end of that beautiful cathedral is maintained. And of course, like anything else, when you're building onto, or you have all those architectural problems that I've had to deal with as a lawyer, but I don't know enough about it. But I think that's certainly true. And in addition, if a developer comes along, they might foresee putting offices on that site or mixed use on that site, where the church are really hoping that they can have their own offices there. That's the hope, and a retirement area for some of the retired priests who are now on Kilbourne.
Did you want to get a response from the question from staff as well?
No, I have another question for them. Okay.
For Mr. Weiss?
No, to staff.
Do you have any more for Mr. Weiss? Does anyone else have any? Okay, thank you both for coming forward.
If I just mention one thing to Mr. Mitzi, as I said, I was here in 2003, and I never remember. I think Mr. Mark was here. He's another one that was here. We're the two that have been hanging on in this file.
Well, Jan and I were here too.
I never remember that $500,000 figure. I really don't. I don't know where that came from. It could have been, but I don't remember.
Thank you. I'm going to ask Mr. Mizzi, when you're finished, to comment on what the definition under the Planning Act of temporary is. So we have that context as well. Back to you, Councillor Schway. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, members of the committee.
Thank you.
Okay, well, the next question is just to clarify, actually, the reason you would want a temporary rezoning as opposed to permanent. Isn't it the case if you grant a permanent rezoning, it then becomes a zoning as of right for the entire future, and we can't really step in, technically we could step in and try to rezone it, but we'd be headed for a lot of trouble, versus renewing every 3 years that incorporates the protection that it doesn't become something that is held as of right.
In a nutshell, Madam Chair, that's correct. In fact, actually, when you see a temporary zoning every time here, it's something that you're a little leery about letting be there permanent anyway. So, yes.
Yeah. Okay. That's it.
Okay, so Mr. Mizzi, would you like to comment on temporary and what that means under the Planning Act, please?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Technically, what you have before you is not an extension. The Planning Act actually does define, by virtue of the specific legislation or paragraph that deals with this, that temporary use is for 3 years. It expires at the end of 3 years, that's the maximum, and should you want to consider for lack of better phraseology, an extension of that use, committee and council must turn its attention to granting a new temporary use bylaw for 3 years. So at this stage, this is the 4th time that committee and council have considered a temporary use bylaw.
Anyone have any other questions? Yes, Councillor Shkreli?
Yeah, and isn't the case the temporary may not be the correct word that they should have chosen for legislation, because there are properties all across Ontario that but get a new application every 3 years, and that's to prevent the property owner from holding that right as of right and being able to access all sorts of other rights and privileges that they couldn't when it was so-called temporary.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, actually, this section of the Planning Act is used fairly regularly, and you're right, it doesn't make permanent a use that's not in the long run desirable for the municipality, but there may be multiple reasons why temporarily it's helpful. At the last committee, that we considered the concerts that would be on the for the one-day only temporary use bylaw. So there's reasons why for a temporary time period it's perfectly fine.
Yeah, and if we were to suddenly grant permanent use, then the applicant would hold as of right that zoning, and we could never ask them to develop.
Oh, that's correct. That they would have that zoning as of right.
Okay. Any other questions on this application? I'm going to go back to Councillor Brockington then. He'll be the first one in any wrap-up. Anyone have? Councillor Nussbaum? Councillor Brockington.
I fully appreciate the benefits of a temporary allowance versus a more permanent zoning amendment. But I think the fair question in this discussion this morning is what is the limit? What is a reasonable limit to multiple requests for these 3-year extensions or 3-year temporary extensions that we should be considering? Because at some point, members of the community may wish just that land to be automatically rezoned. And I understand what the constraints are. If the church's long-term goals are not a parking lot, that they would like to see something built here, then obviously they're not going to request for zoning changes. But I just think it's a fair comment that we as a committee need to ask ourselves what is a reasonable limit to the number of requests that we will be revisited. And it's very likely that within this term of council, this proponent may come back to this committee 3 years from now and ask for another extension. That's possible. But I think it's fair that the committee asks how many times is reasonable. I think, from my point of view, it doesn't really matter what the church's long-term goals are, whether they want to build or not, how much money they're making. I think that's all church's business. And really the question that I'm wrapping around my head is what is the permitted use of this land? And right now it is being used for something that it's not zoned for. And so because these extensions keep being granted, like I said, it's very fair that we question what the long-term plans are for this land. So I think I'm damned if I vote in favor of this, and I'm damned if I vote against it, simply because if we vote in favor, I think we send the wrong message. But if we vote against, we're taking away parking that's very much needed in the market area, and we're taking revenue away from the church that I think they have the right to earn. So I don't want to be punitive and vote against this, but I do want my concerns noted. So I will be plugging my nose and voting in favor, because ultimately I think that's better than voting against. But I do have concerns with a proponent that keeps coming back here every 3 years for something that it's not zoned for to begin with.
Thank you. And I'm adding Councillor Shkreli. Councillor Nussbaum? And then Councillor Shkreli.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I had sort of a similar intervention, so I will keep it short. I mean, I do think I see my role here as being to defend the official plan, which is clearly not contemplating the use of that site as a parking lot. And so, given that this is now the 4th extension, Normally, 3 strikes, you're out. In this case, I agree with my colleague, Councillor Brockington, that, I think there is some sympathy. This is a not-for-profit organization. There are specific challenges. However, and we know that if we were to reject this, it sounds like the site would continue to be a parking lot. But I can certainly say that, assuming that the applicant applies again in 3 years, I will vote against at that time. And I would certainly encourage the applicant to take this period of 36 months to try and find a solution which would involve the development of that site. I do think there are interesting examples of partnerships where the church could lease back office space to a developer who might build there. So although there is a moral hazard problem with voting in favor of this, I hope that the conditions and of this particular case are such that we can encourage the applicant to start thinking about ways in which this is going to change in 36 months' time. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Councillor Shirelli.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think the previous speaker misspoke, because I think what he meant to say is he would reserve his decision until then, because if he announces his decision for an application 3 years in advance, he can't actually sit in decision on it. So, anyway, okay, so we'll just correct that. And then
I heard he was trying to get off the planning committee.
But then, secondly, I think the terminology temporary rezoning is an unfortunate one, because it creates the assumption that at the end of it, you're somehow being an annoyance by asking for a second one or a third one. Jan and I know that there is a particular medical office near Sears, where Carlingwood, where they have had temporary rezonings. I think they're headed on 40 years now, and they just continue to operate. So the issue here, I think, though, is number one, there's if we accept the recommendation, then the church is able to continue its plan and work toward its long-term goal. At the same time, it's dovetailing nicely with work on LRT and with development in the market, where everybody is working together toward that target, and it allows the church to join that effort and probably end up at a more harmonious outcome than would otherwise occur. So finally, you can't force the church to have the money to actually do the construction. We can only help to facilitate that. So I think approving this would be the right thing to do.
Thank you. Anyone else have any final remarks? No? Well, we've had a good discussion on this for sure, and I appreciate that. On the, do you want yeas and nays on this, or is it carried? Carried with one dissent by Councillor Leeper. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you, staff. Thank you, Mr. Vice. But I think, Mr. Vice, you have a strong message to take back to the Catholic diocese. Thank you. All right, so now we are on to our next held item, and since we held it for questions, we do have, in addition to the applicant, we do have somebody here to speak against it. So, Councillor Nussbaum, you're the one that held the 187 Metcalf, which is the Tribeca building. And do you want to allow the resident to come and speak first?
Sure. My question was to staff, so as you wish to proceed.
Why don't you ask your question while I ask Peter Stanton. Peter, come forward and take a seat, and while you're doing that, Councillor Nussbaum is going to ask staff a question.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This was a question to staff, just so that I understand the nature of the parking requirements, and it's due to my ignorance that I don't know the answer to this. I haven't had enough experience with it yet. If these 140 sites are, if the recommendation is approved, could the applicant then use all 140 sites for, say, commuter parking, so it gives out monthly passes, in a way that would prevent the commercial spot which is being contemplated in that building from having use of those 140 sites. So essentially the concern, or the question, it's not a concern, is will there be a minimum number of spaces which the commercial entity will allow its clients or customers to use, or is there a risk that if the applicant sells monthly passes for all 40, that parking will not be available for the commercial space?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The 140 spaces, there's still, as you know, there's a grocery store there on the property, and there's still a bylaw requirement for that grocery store that the applicant would have to adhere to. I think it's about 60 spaces in accordance with the zoning bylaw. It would be an infraction to the zoning bylaw if they were used for other purposes.
Okay, so on top of the 176, 140 for public, 36 for visitor, there is an additional 40 spaces within the first 2 stories which are being reserved for the commercial enterprise.
The zoning recommends of the parking that the residential visitor parking be set at 36. That's at the 8.3% parking requirement, which is typical for downtown. It should not result in any on-street parking within the surrounding area. So that would leave, I think there's 36 for that, and 60 is 96. It would leave the difference. I didn't have that in front of me at the moment, but I think it would be 80 spaces for the ability to conform with the bylaw and rent those out, or to long-term or for short-term parking. It would all depend.
Okay, sorry, now your second intervention confused me, because it says here in the report that allowing 140 of the existing 176 parking spaces on the first 2 levels of underground parking to be used for public parking will not negatively impact the goals related to transit ridership, etc. So when you talked about the additional commercial spaces, is that above and beyond the 176?
No, Madam Chair, there's 176 on the first 2 levels. 36 would be set aside for the for visitor parking, and the others would be set as where public parking could occur. Now, whether or not they charge for those whole amount or not, that's up to the applicant. For the other 140 that were there, they could charge people to go down and use them and be open to the public. There would be parking there for the grocery store. But it should also be remembered, Madam Chair, that there's the opportunity to share that parking. There would be different peak times. The grocery store might be, say, Saturday mornings, whereas parking during the weekdays would be for people. It could be commuters, or it could be people visiting Parliament Hill to go downtown. They would have the opportunity to share that parking and sort of double up on the use, if you will.
But if I'm a customer of Sobeys and it's a Wednesday morning and I'm driving to do my grocery shopping, is there not a risk that I go down into the garage, or there's a sign out front that says all 140 spots are taken because they have purchased monthly passes and there is therefore no commercial parking for that enterprise?
That, Madam Chair, I would say is very unlikely for that to happen. There's always a turnover of parking, even if it was used for long-term parking. It's in the department's opinion that there would be spaces available for people who wish to shop at Sobeys and use that underground parking to do so.
Okay, so essentially there is not a reserved commercial parking space in the first two stories.
Yes, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
I think that's more confusing now. We started out with 60 that we knew about, then we're looking for some extra, and now we may not have any.
Well, I mean, what I'm understanding from this is that as part of the zoning, planning staff do not require of a developer to provide commercial parking spaces for their customers.
I think there would be the commercial operation that would require of the builder to have that relationship. If you think about the Loblaws on Rideau Street, for example, that's different because you don't have a building in that, but you think about the way they work their parking there. A lot of people do park there publicly, but I mean, they do have a system that benefits the people that actually drive there. Yeah. I think we're going to see a mix of people driving and walking and taking the bus, etc. It's I was by, actually, by the side of it, on Nepean Street yesterday. Normally, if I drive downtown, I'm coming down Metcalf and turning on Nepean to come directly into the garage here. But I was walking by, I took the time to look at it, and was excited to see the inside the Sobeys store, and it's getting close to opening. I'll ask what the date is, but thank you very much for those good questions. And now we're going to go to Mr. Stanton. Thank you for coming forward today. And can you just, before you start, can you just tell me, you've written down here OCSCC 961 Tribeca West. Are you representing Condominium Corporation?
That's correct, Madam Chair.
Okay. If you could just pull your mic directly in front of your... Yeah,
that's correct, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a board member of that newly formed condo corporation, which is the Tribeca West Tower.
And are you living there?
There will be a different condo corporation for the East Tower.
And are you living in the building already?
Yes, I am. I'm an owner-occupied.
Thank you. Go ahead.
And I'm here to appeal the application by Claridge for the zoning bylaw amendment. My understanding of the request is to allow 140 parking spaces in the underground garage and to dedicate 36 additional reserved parking spaces for visitor parking. If I could just step back and look at the sort of project history a little bit to give some background. In 2008, Claridge filed for an application to the city for the twin-story residential towers. In 2010, the site plan was approved by the city and condo sales were launched. In 2011, construction began, and for the 455 units in a three-phase build. In 2014, the first residents moved in, and now in 2015, there is a request by Claridge for a zoning bylaw amendment to include public parking as a permitted use. Our corporation, our association, understands that the Tribeca parking garage is really overbuilt in terms of capacity. Our understanding is that there was a pre-existing geotechnical condition. There was lead of clay to deal with, and they had to go down 25 meters below street level to hit bedrock. So it was those conditions and not market conditions that drove the number of the design and size of the parking garage. After exhausting the parking sales to the residential unit buyers and the commercial sales as well, or the commercial parking for Sobeys, there is a surplus amount of parking in the garage. And it's our understanding that Claridge is looking to recapture a portion of their initial capital investment associated with this construction through the zoning bylaw amendment. In addition to this amendment, the applicant is suggesting that the number of visitor parking stalls be reduced from 45 to 36 in order to maximize the revenue from these parking stalls. Our association fully understands and appreciates the city's planning department objectives as stated in the planning committee report. The official plan has an objective to promote public transit in a number of ways, including a reduction in available parking spaces. It also states that short-term public parking should be meet the needs of the local businesses and should be below grade when possible. In addition, the Centertown Secondary Plan encourages parking to support local businesses, and again, that parking should be below grade when possible. We understand that the city recognizes that the applicant is not requesting additional parking, but is looking to effectively utilize the existing resource that they have through public parking. The city does concern itself with the number of visitor parking spaces that are assigned, and the city has established formulae for calculating the number of parking stalls reserved for residential unit visitors. And while our corporation agrees with all the objectives stated in the official and secondary plans, we ask that the city recognize that the community and the residents of our condo association have expressed deep concern regarding the commercial parking, the number of visitor parking spaces, and the on-street parking surrounding the building. Specifically, that inadequate on-site visitor parking will result in further stress being placed on the current very busy situation in terms of on-street parking surrounding the towers. Furthermore, we would like to present the relevant part of the Tribeca West Tower disclosure statement, and I have copies for you if necessary, dated March 1st, 2010, which is required under the Ontario Condominium Act. This disclosure was supplied to all condo owners by Claridge prior to their purchase, and Article 16 of the disclosure clearly states that 45 parking stalls will be allocated for visitor parking in the commercial component of the parking garage. Our corporation objects to the specific number of visitor parking stalls that is being suggested by the city, which is 36, in the amendment. We feel that this number is inadequate and is less than the legally assigned 45 under our condo disclosure statement, Article 16. The appellant suggests that the number of required visitor parking stalls be set at 45 as originally designated in the disclosure statement, and that public parking be added as a permitted use in the amendment. Please keep in mind that the promised 45 dedicated visitor stalls is substantially less than the current as-of-right city zoning requirements, which are calculated by 0.2 per residential unit. And if you use that rate, there would be 87 visitor parking stalls.
Okay. I just have to let you know that you've used up your, I've even given you extra time because I interrupted you at the beginning, so if you could bring it home in 10 seconds, that'd be great.
All right. We believe that our suggestion meets everyone's objectives, that the applicant will be allowed to generate revenue from public parking, that the appellant, we will maintain the same number of visitor parkings that were originally promised to us, and that the city objectives are met. And I would just like to confirm that we're appealing this decision strictly on the number of assigned visitor parkings units, and that is a material change from the number that was originally promised to the residents of the Tribeca Towers. And furthermore, any reduction in visitor parking, we believe, will result in an on-site parking shortage and place further stress on the on-street parking.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Stanton. I'm going to ask Mr. Mizzi to make a comment on the on our downtown minimum requirements for visitor. Mr. Mizzi?
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the 0.2 ratio, which equals 87 spaces, is the calculation based on the zoning bylaw, but it's been a long-established practice in the downtown that we apply when we're reviewing projects in areas of intensification in the downtown to promote public transit use, walking, etc., that we use the long-established minimum downtown visitor standard, which is 0.83 spaces per unit, which is exactly what this proposal will meet, which is 36. And many of the developments that this committee sees over the last number of years have that exact same standard of 0.83.
Thank you. Does anyone have any questions from Mr. Stanton, please? Thank you very much for coming forward today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
I'm going to ask Jim Burgout and Neil Malhotra to come forward, please. They're the applicant. I'm going to ask that you just explain a little bit about the logistics of how your parking is working, because I think that would be, I know it would be helpful for me. Like, for example, people that are going to, for visitors parking, are they paying anything? Are the people with, what kind of a mechanism do you have? People are taking a ticket, they have a pass. How do we know that it's the Sobeys people, the traffic for Sobeys, for example, that would be using this should we approve it? So are you speaking,
Sure.
Neil?
Yeah, I'll speak to the operational part. So in contemplation of this development, the 2 floors were always planned to be accessible for commercial and primarily to service the tenant, Sobeys. One of the operational issues, going forward, but I'll start with the actual operation. Essentially, all people who enter the parking garage, whether for Sobeys, whether for the small commercial tenant, future tenant, whether for visitor parking, would all pay to access the 2 levels of parking. In partnership with Sobeys, then we would provide a redemption system, so they're able to credit the purchasers they feel should be credited for the parking, and that's essentially how the parking would operate. The operational issue that we were struggling with was really how do we really then identify somebody who's being parking at Sobeys. And we all know that's impossible in the end. I can't stop somebody from going in, buying a bag of chips, and then going to watch a 3-hour show at the NEC. There's no way for us to control that. So really the purpose of the application is to alleviate what would be a legal issue we have a very difficult time dealing with. Ultimately, it doesn't affect how the garage is operating. Today's application has no effect on how the operation of the garage will occur.
So, for example, when they go into the Sobeys, if they're shopping in there, they're not given a chip that they put into the meter on their way out?
Yeah, I think it's more digital operation now, where the number would be entered at the cash register and eliminate the credit.
Okay. Jim?
Yeah, I could, with respect to the numbers and the gentleman before us and the 45 spaces and the 36 spaces, and as Neil said, the intention of those first 2 levels of parking was the mixed-use part, so the commercial parking and the visitors were captured on those first 2 levels. And even in the 140 spaces that are being recommended right now, that includes as many visitors to the building as want to come. It's 36 is being designated outside of that 140, but there could be another 60 people visiting the building, but they park in the public space. And in the documentation that was put forward at the very beginning as part of the declaration of the condominium was that the visitor parking was paid parking anyway. So those 36 spaces, or whether it's 60 spaces, it's all part of that top 2 levels, and the visitors have to pay to park there, and that was always disclosed right from day one. So whether it's 36 designated in accordance with this bylaw, if the condominium requires us to designate 9 more spaces in the paid parking area for visitors to park, that can be done too. But realistically, visitors will park wherever they like in the paid parking area, so that we don't really see that as an issue.
Does anyone have any questions of the delegation? Okay. Thank you for coming forward. Thank you. Councillor Nussbaum of staff.
Yeah, just a question that came up as a result of the applicant's statement. So if the visiting parking is paid, which is the deal that they've made with the condo corporation, then do you anticipate that visitors to this condominium will find street parking in order to avoid the costs of parking in a parking garage? And if so, does this have any impact on the concern of on-street parking?
Well, Madam Chair, we can't control, of course, if someone does not wish to pay to park there. The bylaw doesn't specifically speak to the payment, but if someone wishes to save money, they always have the opportunity to park on the street and look for free parking. That can't be controlled, no.
Yeah, I mean, I think my point is, just we need to be clear-eyed about the fact that this sounds to me like it's not going to resolve the side street parking issue, because as was talked about at Transportation Committee last week, people are price sensitive when it comes to parking, so we can anticipate that visitors to this site will look for cheaper on-street parking first before entering the garage, which, again, I'm not objecting to the application. I'm simply saying we need to be clear-eyed about that because there is a suggestion in the report that this is going to resolve the side street parking issue for visitors. Thanks.
But it's not going to, I don't think that you would say that it's going to exacerbate the issue either.
Madam Chair.
Of on-street parking.
Yes, Madam Chair, and I guess if on-street parking and the shortage of on-street parking in some ways it means it's a vibrant community. It's a problem that a vibrant community has, and the alternative would be if other people are already parking there, like in parking use in short supply now, I would say almost forced to go and pay for parking for the convenience just to have a parking spot. So it's sort of a double-edged sword there.
And we know that our bylaw officers are active in the downtown, certainly. But I also would add, because of the location of that building, of the new Tribeca, it's very close to our parking as well. So in times that are not work-related, this is a big option and for people to have a place to park as well. because parking on street is always a premium, no matter what time you're down here. Maybe Sunday morning for brunch or something, you get lucky. Anyone have any other questions? Okay, so on the report, Carrie? Thank you very much. Thank you. We're going to go to our last item, which is the presentation under Mr. Mizzi's guidance. I'd like you to introduce the staff that are going to make the presentation. Revised circulation packages for development applications. And who's coming forward for that? Charmaine and group? Sure. So the reason we have this before you is because staff have worked hard to try and make something that's easier for the communities to work with and for anyone that's interested in applications to work with. It's sort of like the 5 W's of, so that you say, well, who is this? Well, where is it? Well, why are they doing it? That kind of a thing. Trying to simplify it. In the past, you were getting sometimes too much information which actually wasn't even clear enough to understand what it was we were sending out. So that's the... Yes.
And before you do the presentation, I was wondering if staff could just, so everyone knows, if staff could just indicate that all the information that's there on DevApps now will continue to be there.
But in an easier to understand fashion. And you're going to take that away. Introduce your folks.
Sure. Did you want me to answer? Yes.
Actually, not yet.
Not yet?
I want them to make the presentation. Thank you. And if you have a question out of that, then there's that question, then they haven't told us. So now you folks have heard what his question is, so hopefully you're going to cover that. I don't want you to preempt their presentation. Mr. Mizzi?
Madam Chair and members of the Planning Committee, I'm very pleased to introduce, I think you know everyone here at the table, but from your right to left is Peggy Schenk, who's our Manager of Business Services, Charmaine Forgy, who's our Program Manager of Business Support and Evaluation, and Alex Sagan, who's our Project Management Officer. And they'll be presenting on the revised circulation packages. If I might just add, and hopefully not take away from their presentation, this is part of a larger year or so long approach to re-examine our public engagement efforts and re-prioritize and refresh them. And the committee members are probably most familiar with our new development signage that's out there in the public, which has won us an award in the last year. So that's part of the overall strategy to better public engage. And so at this point, I can turn it over to them to take you through what we've been doing recently.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Does that work? Okay. Chair Harder, members of the Planning Committee, ladies and gentlemen, I'm really pleased to be in front of you today to highlight some of the recent work of Business Services Branch to improve the public circulation packages for development applications. What you will see today, as Mr. Mizzi mentioned, is a continuation of the Planning and Growth Management 2014 Public Engagement Strategy and follows the launch last year of the new on-site signs for development applications. The material provided to our residents as part of the circulation package has been refreshed, enhanced, and modernized. Technical reports and plans continue to be available through the online DevApps tool, to answer Councillor Chiarelli's question. I don't want to take away from the presentation, so I'd now like to turn it over to Ms. Forgy and Monsieur Seguin to provide the presentation.
Good morning. Thank you, Peggy. So I'm very pleased to give this presentation this morning. The contents of the presentation are the goals that we have that will outline of revising the circulation packages, what was in scope, the enhancements that were made, and the comparisons of the current and the revised circulation packages. The goals, in accordance with the corporate public engagement strategy, we ensured that everything that we do is in accordance with a public engagement strategy. We're also demystifying the development review process using, and you'll see many times throughout the presentation, I will refer to plain language to ensure that plain language is being used, also to encourage residents to get involved. what was in scope for the application types? We utilize the application types that are chosen, most frequent application types. So the first three that we've chosen are the zoning bylaw amendment, the 120-meter circulation, the plan of subdivision, again with 120-meter circulation, and then the site plan control. There's not a 120-meter circulation with this one, but we create a highlight sheet because it's a lot of interest in the site plan control applications. So the enhancements, as I mentioned, plain language. As you'll see throughout the presentation, plain language is important. A streamlined format. You will see that the information is now presented in bullet form or numbered lists to facilitate reading. Images of the proposed development, the same images that are on our on-site signs. You'll see this in the circulation package as well when they're available. A highlight sheet. The highlight sheet is new, and the sheet explains the development application and the development review process that relates to the type of application. So this is a new piece of information that will be in the circulation package. And then there's the redesigned comment sheet. You'll see the redesigned comment sheet provides a lot of ways that the folks can know how they can get notified, and also increases the space. So, what everyone's been waiting for, the introduction letter. As you'll see here, this is how it exists today. And we have moved towards engaging and straight-to-the-point title. You'll see that we frame the language, is the same language that's on the development application side is in our introduction letter. We, again, use plain language. We break up the information, so it's in bullet forms. Here you can see some bullet forms, and also there's opportunity for the residents to say how they can stay informed and involved. And then again, we're moving people towards the development application, the dev app site, to get the more technical information. The highlight sheet, so again, this is brand new. It's addition to the circulation package, and what we want to do here is demystify the development application. So here, what you're looking at, you'll see that we define what is zoning and what a bylaw amendment and what changes can be made. So here it gives all the frequently questions that our planners are asked. We now have it in an easy read format. It also explains on the back of the sheet, it explains the sequence of development review process. So it goes from the step-by-step. It provides ways for the residents to get involved during the development review process. So here again, you'll see that we're saying how to get involved, and it outlines the different options, how they can get involved. And again, for more information, where they can get more information. Again, they can either contact the planner or we're pushing them to the websites. So now we're on to the application summary. The redesigned application summary has similar language as the new development notice that's on the sign, so there where it was before. And again, we've used the same language as we can that's on the sign, so it's consistency in language. Again, you can see that we've moved towards more plain language. We have everything that actually it reads, it's engaging and it reads well. Also, sorry, just one more click here. Also, once again, we're ending everything with how do they stay informed and how do they get involved. So again, it highlights the ways the residents can stay informed and involved during the development review process. The location map. The location map has not undergone any significant change. You know, we refreshed it a little bit, but we really haven't changed it that much. But when there is a street level view of proposed development, it will be included in the circulation package. So when there is a picture, we will include it. And again, this will be consistent with the current practice for the development on-sign signage. The comment sheet, just bring your attention, this is how it currently looks. And now we've just moved to a more straightforward form for residents to complete, and also, as you'll see here, what's the best way to reach them, and that we can ensure that they're getting future notification. Here you can see the comment area for comment was very small, and here you'll see that we've moved it not only in that space, but we've really encouraged residents to provide their feedback. And that's the end. Thank you.
Thank you, and that was in plain language, so thank you very much. Vice Chair Tierney?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I did just want to quickly say thank you. The form is something for years I've looked at, and it looked like it came off a 1980s typewriter, so I think you've really enhanced it and made it very simple to use, so thank you for all the hard work on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kadri?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you for this revision on the application process. Just a question, in terms of the list of community associations that these applications go out to, how often is that revised within the city?
So we typically provide a newspaper ad once a year to have people re-register or confirm if things have changed. And we do get calls from time to time when a president has changed, or there's been a change in the leadership of a community association.
But the staff doesn't go back out and check with the community associations to see if they're defunct or if the membership has changed, so you're dependent on the community association coming back to you to respond.
We are. We do sometimes get information from our planning staff to tell us that this one isn't in existence, but primarily it's through advertising in media.
All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Just a question with regard to the letter. Was there a decision made, or can you tell me a little bit about the history? I noticed that the name of the applicant is not on the letter. So first is, what is the reason for that? And secondly, if someone did want to find out who the applicant was, how would they go about doing that?
Madam Chair, actually, it is on the application summary. Maybe I'll just go back. Sorry, right here, the applicant email is right there. Applicant, right, is there, and the address, and the email, and the phone number. It's just too small to see. I apologize.
And sorry, that's part of the package that gets sent out within 120 meters?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Leeper?
Thank you very much. This is a big leap forward, I think. One piece of feedback with respect to the ottawa.ca/devapps pointer that's in the form. Once people are there, that can be somewhat counterintuitive to use. Just above that section, you've listed the file number, the DevApps number. Can we make it clear that that number will help drive people's navigation?
Madam Chair? Yes, we can.
Perfect. The second piece, higher level, I guess, is the mail out goes to property owners. And I know in some of my door knocking over the past few months, I'm often running across residents who are tenants who have been skipped over with respect to receiving notices. Do we have a plan for dealing with tenants to help them be alerted proactively that there are development applications in their neighborhoods?
Madam Chair, we have no way of knowing who's a tenant and who is actually the owner, like if they're rented out or that. But what happens is the buck slips, that if we're doing an open house or an information session, the buck slips will actually be right to the address.
Right to the, we should make alert to the occupant.
Yes, to the mailbox.
Are these able to go out to occupant as well?
I will defer to my
mailbox. The occupant would open it up unless we just set the ball to occupant.
Yeah.
So I think, I think that if with all due respect, I think that some people are never going to be interested anyways, and people that are tend to be engaged and read the local papers, read what the council blogs, read the, your e-letters, and et cetera, and this is another tool that makes it simple.
Right. If I may, again, respectfully, during a recent door knock with respect to the local commercial study, for instance, there are any number of people who are renting semi-detached houses in one part of my ward. Had the local commercial study proceeded as it was going to, they could potentially have woken up one day to, next to a gelato shop. They had no indication at all that this study was underway. And as far as I can tell, in large part, that was because they were tenants. The landowners had received notifications, but not the occupants of the houses with respect to the study being underway. So I guess I'll keep pushing through this term of council for more notification, more proactive.
And that's something that we have to take on for sure, because I think that we go beyond what other municipalities do in notification, and we obviously take it seriously, which is why we have come up with a simpler format that has far less words, and you might have a chance of understanding them even if you've never looked at one before.
And this is a leap ahead. Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone before Councillor Shirelli? Just because I know
that how the system
works? No, I just think it's because that you'll be the closer on this. So.
Oh, okay.
Okay, Councillor Shirelli.
Well, I think I do want to start by saying if Councillor Leeper is trying to suggest that people in Westboro are waking up to a sudden gelato shop are somehow going to be offended, I don't buy it. On the material looks good, at least as the initial material submitted to people, but I think there are two things we need to be protective of. One is that the consultation received goes to the people who actually make the decisions. I don't want to see a repeat of when we did the garbage consultation back 4 or 5 years ago, and all the consultation was collected and members of council didn't see it. They just got a summary from staff, and we voted based on that. For it to be consultation, the decision makers have to see it. Otherwise, it's not real consultation. So on this form, I'd like to see something added on the response form with the indication that responses will be copied to the member of council. Okay, and I don't know if it is, and if it is, I haven't.
Charmaine?
Madam Chair, yes, it's just you can't see it.
In fact, I did see one that said CC Mathieu Fleury, right?
Yeah, but that's in the one going to the residents. I'm talking when they send an answer, they have to be comfortable to know that it's going to go to their member of council. Because right now I'm getting two types of people phoning us on different issues, not this issue, but issues where they write into the general city website, where A, they either assume that we got it when we didn't, or B, they're frustrated because they don't know for sure that we're getting it. So,
are you talking about the 311 ones as well, Glenn?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think we need a clarification to residents. If you're going to participate and try to shape the law for the area, then your member of council is going to see your comments.
So, Charmaine?
Yes, Madam Chair. We do have it is noted that this will be shared with councillors, the ward councillor.
So the actual forms, but not a summary of them.
If that, Madam Chair, if that's what the councillor would want, is all the actual forms with the comments, that is something that we'd be open to share.
Yeah, because sometimes the interpretation of what someone says can be different than what we read. So I'd like to see the actual comments.
So you're looking for a copy of all of that, in addition to what staff would put in the report, where they say, here's the question, here's the thing, and it does identify. From a privacy perspective, Mr. Mark, is there any issue with that?
Madam Chair, I know that this has been looked at in the context of other consultation. I recall that it was raised by Councillor Shirelli in the last term. So two thoughts. A, I would think that it would only be upon request of the councillor, because some members of council may not wish to receive copies of all forms. And on the privacy aspects, I will ensure that you receive a response, and all members of the committee, within this week with respect to that aspect. I'm not fully briefed on that, but I will get back to you.
Okay, well, if it deals, if it is the same law, which I believe it is, that we handle in the rest of the corporation, then we simply need an indication on there that your comment will be sent to your council member, and the opportunity to opt out of that if they want to, but again, we make the decisions, not staff, so I'm not sure how.
I think we have to make it easy for staff so they don't have to think about which of the 23 people plus the mayor want to have that information. Right. And so I think as part of what your little investigation, Mr. Mark, would be on the privacy, perhaps you could give some thought to what staff would have to add very simply to the form that shows that that information would be shared. Yeah. On the comeback. And I think that would be the most simple way. And then simply direction to staff. If you, and there may be some files that come forward that you may want all the information. There may be some that come forward that you don't. But Peggy?
I just want to add that many of our comments come through the DevOps website, and there is an opportunity there for people to check the councillor's email or many councillors' emails.
Through IT, we're probably going to be changing that as well, so that the default is that it goes to council members, and so we might want to line it up.
Right. We have to make it easy so it's not more work for staff, and that we get the information we need. I think we all agree on that?
Yeah.
And we'll look for that and more information, that added intel, Mr. Mark. Thank you.
And then, my second question is, when groups become concerned about an application, my experience is no matter how much information you put on the website, they not only have no problem with it being that large a volume, they actually want more of it, and they read every single word in it. So I want to ensure that all of that stuff that is there now in DevApps will still be there for people to search, including the studies, the technical studies, including the traffic studies, including elevations. Sometimes they have market analysis. And all of those things that went into the inputs in staff recommendations remain there on the site, even if you have this as sort of a primary layer that people will look at because it's simpler for the worker bees of the communities who have to sort through everything. I want to make sure it's still going to be there, and that if somebody wants to appeal our decision, all of that stuff is still there. So do we get that assurance?
We have no plans to change anything that is on DevApps currently.
Okay.
And we continue to add material as it's updated.
Okay, good. Good. That's it.
Thank you. Thanks very much. Anybody else? So on item number 5, I just want to thank staff very much for the presentation, and thank you, Mr. Mizzi, for your leadership. And I wanted to say that last Wednesday, the entire staff of Planning and Growth Management met in 2 different sessions, one in the morning with half the staff, one in the afternoon at the Nepean Sportsplex, and the whole theme was partnership, and there were some sub-themes that came up, like no surprises from Ms. Snedden. That's her particular theme. And it was led by Mr. Mizzi, and it was very well done, and Charmaine was the lead, I think, in organizing it. I spoke at both sessions, and it was an opportunity to talk about relationships and remember the fact that we're in the customer service business. So it was a good day, and I hope that the feedback that you're getting from it supports that. Have you received feedback from staff?
Yes, we have, Madam Chair, and it's been excellent feedback. Staff really appreciated the panel discussion and your involvement, Chair Harder. It was a great session.
Right. So building on our first meeting that we had, where I was speaking about building blocks, Charmaine was mentioning the panel. What happened at the panel was we had Pierre Dufresne from the industry, we had Sheila Perry from the FCA, and myself and Mr. Mizzi, and we all had the same questions, and then staff were encouraged to ask other questions. What was remarkable, that here we are just about 6 months into our new term and our first year, and the desire to have that the building blocks and the better community consultation, that it's evident. in the comments that were made. There's so much more collaboration, so staff are doing a great job in bringing all that together. And Vice Chair Tierney and I have been privy to several opportunities where we have seen that. Thanks very much. We still have way to go, for sure, but comments are always welcome, and we look forward to hearing them. So on this item, is it received? Thank you. So on to, does anyone have any notices of motion? No? How about inquiries? Pardon? Good. Other business, I have other business. I wanted to let you know that on June the 1st, if you haven't received an invite yet, we're going to be having a tour, our first planning and growth management tour. And Natalie in my office is going to be taking the lead along with Mr. Herwire and his staff. And we've decided on to start at Centertown and go west. And so we're going to go, we'll have a tour with Councillor McKenney through Somerset Ward. Councillor Leeper will take the lead along with staff and show us some infill examples, commercial, that we're just going to be looking at on May 26th. So real cases of where this is happening, going into Councillor Taylor's, probably looking at, for example, the solution for the LRT, extension and what that looks like, and then culminating out in Bell's Corners, because Bell's Corners, I think, is the area of the city that is in the most opportunistic situation. It actually has 4 accesses to the 416 and 417, and the time has come for that kind of a look. So Councillor Chiarelli will be taking the lead. We're going to come back here, and Mr. Casey, who built the Merit, the lovely building here that looks like Ghostbusters in front of us here, will get off the bus. He's going to give us a tour of the Merit. Folks from the media, you're welcome to attend as well, and certainly other members of council. The other thing that we're going to be doing, and we don't have a meeting date yet, but I think it's going to be mid-June, is going to be a working session for members of Planning Committee. We do this once a term. We'll be talking about strategic initiatives and work plan and what we have before us, and talking about things that you would also like to include that can be achieved. Not pie in the sky, everybody. Don't get too excited. It'll be how we can make sure that we are going forward. We've got a very aggressive plan. So those are 2 things coming up before the summer. Thanks very much. Are we adjourned? Thank you.